Hey everyone, Austin here again with another Let's Play video. Today, as you can see, it's going to be Mortal Kombat, this time for the Sega Genesis. Now, I've done a couple of Mortal Kombat Let's Plays over the years, and I'm going to continue to do Mortal Kombat Let's Plays of the varying versions of the game. Mortal Kombat was one of my favorite fighting games of the era, along with parts 2 and 3. And I've played a lot of the versions. It's just fun playing these versions and seeing their differences and seeing how they hold up today. And one of the more interesting examples is the Sega Genesis version that we're playing. Let's see if we can do the blood code. A-B-A-C-A-B-B. Yep. If you want to do the blood code on the Sega Genesis version, you just type A-B-A-C-A-B-B at that screen, and blood will be enabled. Back in the day, Mortal Kombat was so controversial that the home versions didn't have blood by default. The Super Nintendo version just had absolutely no blood whatsoever. But the Genesis and the Game Gear versions, you had to enter a cheat code for it. Well, I guess the Master System version as well, which didn't come out in the United States, but came out over in Europe. And you know what's really funny about that is gore and violence in games has come such a long way. So much that the original Mortal Kombat looks extremely, extremely tame by nature, especially the console versions. You're gonna see the blood in this game and be like, they complained about that back in the day? Like, it's really, over 20 years later, it's crazy, like, how much it's changed. Yet, when this game came out, it was... everybody thought it was the craziest thing that's ever happened to video games. Even though in hindsight it actually wasn't that crazy. Oh man, look at those 4 blood splatters. Oh man, oh there's another 3 drops, look. And it's just like, oh man. Alright, well let's get right into this, guys. Let me check the options real quick. Difficulty, I'm going to put it on medium. Really, this game, I don't think the difficulty really matters. The difficulty was always just kind of dumb in the Mortal Kombat games. And in like a bad way, like Mortal Kombat 2 in particular, the AI was really, really, ugh. You throw like a fireball out and they would either duck it or jump it like every single time, 100% of the time. So this version's not as bad though. So we're gonna play as Sub-Zero. We're gonna take the easy way out and have a character that can stun my opponent. So both Sub-Zero and Scorpion can stun the opponent. Yeah, now that I think about it, I think they're the only characters in the game that have stun moves, so they're definitely the easiest characters to beat the game with. I'd say Sub-Zero more so than Scorpion, because Sub-Zero's got his slide move, and his freeze attack doesn't leave him wide open as much if the opponent blocks the attack. So, but yeah, what's really interesting about this game is that there's a lot of frames of animation missing in this game, and I never really realized it because the Genesis version of Mortal Kombat is something I played a little bit as a kid, but I mainly played the Super Nintendo version, and I always was under the impression the Genesis version had like way more frames of animation and stuff like that. Maybe it does. Looking at it, I highly doubt it though. And it's actually pretty choppy. I'm really surprised. I mean, I am really used to the arcade version though. I actually own a JAMA PCB of the arcade Mortal Kombat, so like I am really used to the arcade version of Mortal Kombat. But I also played a lot of, besides the Super Nintendo version, I played a lot of the Sega CD version back in the day. So I never owned the Genesis version when it was new. I think I had a used copy later on down the road just because, copies of Mortal Kombat were like a dime a dozen, and if you're collecting video games, it's just, why not own it, right? But I got the Sega CD version in probably 96. I know it was a few years after it came out, and that was the one I primarily played. And I am pretty sure that version has a good bit more frames of animation and so forth than this Genesis version does. I will eventually do a Let's Play on that version, so you guys will get to see that sometime as well. And the Sega CD version, aside from the load times, it's a really solid version of Mortal Kombat. It features all the arcade music, so you got like this really dark soundtrack. It's really cool. But yeah, I'm really surprised at like how choppy this version is. Like, you gotta look at a game like Street Fighter 2 on the Genesis, it animates nice and smoothly in comparison to this. I know that wasn't arcade perfect either, but it was still pretty good compared to the arcade game. But this is just like, man, there's just a lot of like gaps between the movements. The game still plays well though, which is cool. The game still plays fine, which is arguably the most important factor. But from a visuals perspective, I would definitely have to side with the Super Nintendo version of this game. I know this game has blood and all, but I mean, like I said in the intro, like, does a few blood splatters really matter that much? You know, in hindsight. The Super Nintendo one is definitely a prettier version to look at, no doubt. And I've done actually a full playthrough of that on Twitch, but I haven't actually done a dedicated Let's Play of that yet, and I will do a dedicated Let's Play. And what's interesting about this, to test your might, you have to press your low attacks repeatedly back and forth. And I was just trying to talk there and demonstrate. We'll get to another one. What's interesting about this version is in the arcade, you have to hit block to attack on the bonus stages like that. In this one, you have to hit start. Now, start is block on a 3-button controller, so that makes sense. But if you're playing a 6-button controller, the middle buttons are block. So Y and B are the block buttons. But they don't work on the bonus stages on this game. So it's like they actually programmed the attack move on the bonus stages specifically to the start button and not to quote-unquote block, which is kind of interesting. So you got to remember that when you're doing this if you're using a 6-button controller. I would normally say the 6-button controller is the only way to play this game, but the fact is the first Mortal Kombat's not that complex, and you can totally get away with just using a 3-button controller just fine. It actually works out really well. I am using a 6-button controller right now though, so I don't really have to worry about that. But for those of you guys that are using Genesis 6-button controllers, which I'm going to assume is probably a lot of you guys, you know, because in this day and age, a 6-button controller is really easy to get. And, but for the few people out there that do want to use a 3-button, you know, it does work just fine for this game. So, Mortal Kombat 2 or 3, I highly recommend a 6-button controller. I do not recommend playing those with a 3-button. They are much more difficult to play. Alright, Pit Fatality. In the Sega CD version of this game, there's blood and heads and bodies and stuff, you know, sitting on the spikes down there, which is really cool. So, the Sega CD version manages to be a little bit closer to the arcade game. So, I'm playing as Sub-Zero, and, you know, he's a pretty iconic character in the series. He's been in pretty much every Mortal Kombat since its inception, and his signature move is his freeze attack, where he can basically just freeze. And to do that, you do a quarter circle forward motion and high punch. So Mortal Kombat has high punch by pressing X. You have low punch by pressing B. You have high kick by pressing Z, just like that, and then you have low kick by pressing A. And then your middle buttons are block, and that's basically mimicking the original arcade setup. So in the arcade, you had 2 buttons on the left, 2 buttons on the right, and 1 button dead center in the middle between those. It was an interesting button layout, actually, when it first came out. It's pretty interesting that they went for that button layout. It was totally different from most games you had seen before it. It wasn't the standard 6-button layout from Street Fighter, but it wasn't just your standard 3-button layout that a lot of games had either. So, but if you do quarter circle forward high punch, which for me is X, Sub-Zero will do his freeze attack, his freeze projectile. I'm sure there's an actual name for it, but I don't know it off the top of my head. Oops. Now from there, like a lot of other fighting games, by holding down certain directions and pressing an attack button, you'll do different attacks. So if you press back and low kick, you'll sweep. If you do back and high kick, you do a roundhouse. And the roundhouse is one of my favorite moves in the game, actually. If you just tap down and press low kick, you do like a little baby kick, which honestly I don't really use. Like this. I really don't use it at all. No, not very useful. Not one of my favorite moves in the game. And if you press down and either of the punch buttons in this version, you'll do the uppercut, which the uppercut is the most powerful single move in the game, or single normal move in the game. There might be some special moves that do more damage. Bam, uppercut just like that. And for Sub-Zero's fatality, it's forward, down, forward, high punch, so X. So forward, down, forward, X. You don't have to do the inputs super quick in this version of the game, which is kind of nice. So if you're having a hard time with any of the Mortal Kombat games, I recommend starting off with this one because it is definitely the easiest, I think, to play. The controls in this version can be a little unresponsive sometimes when you're trying to do like a special move. So maybe I'd recommend the arcade version over this one. You can get that on a variety of compilations, like the there's the Mortal Kombat 3-pack or the Mortal Kombat collection for modern consoles, which is pretty nice. It's like $10, and you get, you know, the arcade versions of the first 3 Mortal Kombat games, including Ultimate MK3, I believe, which is nice. So kind of like 4 games in a way, if you look at it. But the first Mortal Kombat has always been the most lenient in terms of timing and how fast you have to do your fatalities. I think people were doing fatalities so often on this game that they shortened the time on MK2. I don't know if that's the exact reason they did it, but the timer is shorter on Mortal Kombat 2, and it basically forces you to have to put the inputs in faster because you have less time to actually do the fatality in that game. So right there, I literally just did forward, down, forward, high punch. That's the exact pattern I did it, and the exact rate at which I did it. So as you can see, you don't have to do it very quickly in this version of the game. And that's the case for pretty much any of the first Mortal Kombat games or ports. So now we're at the endurance round, and at this point, it's probably best to just do a lot of jump kicks. The AI has a tendency of just eating up your jump kicks like crazy. And, come on, Sonya. Thank you. Now, if this was the arcade version, it would probably be a little more challenging. I am also playing on the medium skill mode on this game. It does go up to hard or very hard or something like that. But if the enemies start blocking, the endurance round becomes much more challenging, so. Ooh, lucky throw. One thing I like about this is that if you defeat Sonya, it says finish her instead of finish him, which is pretty cool. Some versions, actually, it still said finish him, even if you were fighting a chick. So there's a nice little attention to detail there, which I always thought was pretty cool. It's not in every version of the game, as far as I recall. And it's not... Or maybe it was in most versions of the first Mortal Kombat, but maybe they took it out of, like, the sequels. Ooh, he went right through that. Normally that should freeze him. Alright, so let's get back into the routine. Just try to do lots of jump kicks and see what happens. Oh, I knew he was gonna harpoon me. Yeah, that was a bad situation. I knew he was gonna harpoon, so I should have done something instead of just jumping right into it. One other thing that's kind of interesting, and I don't know if this is just exclusive to the home versions or if it's in the arcade version as well, so if anybody out there knows, post a comment below. If you get up close, pressing your low punch button will actually sometimes throw the enemy. You might have to hold in a different direction or something like that when you do it. But if you do it with your kicks as well, or at least high kick, it will also throw them, which I think is really interesting. You know, come to think of it, it might even do that in Street Fighter 2, and they might have taken a hint from that game, but I'm not 100% sure. But I do find that to be pretty interesting. So just a heads up for anybody that is thinking about playing this game. Oh, super lucky. Oh, I messed up the inputs. I got really lucky there. I thought he was gonna try to harpoon again or do something else, but ooh, another one, cool. So the trick to the test your might sections is pressing the low attacks back and forth, not together. If you mash them together, they won't do anything. But you basically need to go AC, 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 or back and forth. Kind of like that. I basically move my, I change my hand movement to where my fingers are on top of the controller. Instead of you know, normally when I play, I just use my thumb for every attack. But I'll basically be like arcade style, where I can mash the buttons back and forth really quickly. And that's the key to finishing the test your might sections. Aw, Kano, don't be like that, man. I just realized a lot of the sound effects in this game are really like muted or like even just non-existent compared to the arcade version, and maybe even compared to the Super Nintendo version. Sega CD version, it's been a little while since I played it, so I'm gonna have to refresh my memory with that one. I'm gonna need to obtain another copy to do a Let's Play on that. But one of the downsides of this version of the game is how muffled everything is. Like, you do a jump kick and it's just like this really light sound, you know. In the arcade version, it's just like you hit them and it's just like, it's like psh, you know, whenever you hit them with the jump kick. It's really cool. But in this version, it's just like basically nothing. Like, I just did that fatality, and when Sub-Zero grabbed his chin and pulled his head off, there was like nothing. It was just silence. That's right. We're on the last endurance match, so we go straight into the Goro fight, which is, again, I think is pretty cool attention to detail. I definitely like how they do that. They don't do that in Mortal Kombat 2. So I always thought that was pretty cool in this one. So the first time you get to this part of the game, like, it really throws you off. You don't expect Goro to just drop in. In some cases, if you're not that experienced with the series, you might not even expect to fight Goro at all. Wow, beat Goro on the first try. Very cool. And I don't think it's going to throw us straight into Shang Tsung. Yeah, I didn't think so. Even though we're going to fight him at the exact same place. So it would have been cool if he just dropped right in too. So basically, like, if you wanted to, you could really have that last endurance match truly be an endurance match. You know, you basically fight 5 or 4 foes back to back. That would be some really cool attention to detail, I think. You know, and Shang Tsung morphing into any of the other characters was always a really cool concept, but in hindsight, it's just like, You know, I just beat Kano 4 times, or technically 3 times. Like, you know, obviously his moves aren't gonna work for you, Shang Tsung. You know, maybe you should just do your own thing. Goro I can understand, but Kano, no. You are the supreme Mortal Kombat warrior. So there you have it, guys. Mortal Kombat for the Sega Genesis. You know, it's, you know, looking back at it now, well over 20 years after it came out, it's interesting to see, you know, the differences this has versus the arcade game, and even some of the other versions of the game, like the Super Nintendo one, the Sega CD one, and so forth. It's still fun, though, you know, and if you ever find, if you're a collector and gamer, and if you ever find this out in the wild and it's cheap, I do recommend picking it up. You know, it's a nice one to have in the collection. It's definitely a big piece of fighting game history, and it's actually kind of a big piece of the console wars history as well. Like, back when the Super Nintendo and the Genesis were going head to head, this was a major talking point in that debate. I won't go into whether I think that debate was cool or not. I'm kind of like, I'm not really a big fan of console wars these days, but back in the day growing up, people were always talking about, you know, the varying differences between the 16-bit version of Mortal Kombat. Of course, yeah, if you had an IBM PC compatible that was powerful, and you had the PC version of Mortal Kombat that just stomped all the home ports of the game. That was the best home port at the time. Very, very faithful to the arcade game. And but still, it's like, oh, Genesis version has blood, blah, blah, blah. You know, back when blood in video games was like a new thing. And, you know, but I think the people that played the Super Nintendo version secretly knew, like, their version was actually better, blood aside. You know, graphically and sound-wise and stuff like that. It was more faithful to the arcade version. But it's just, it's funny thinking about, and it's sort of like reminiscing about those times that are just so moot now and like redundant, basically. Like, oh man, hindsight's 2020, and it's just, it's funny to look back on that history and there's, for me, those memories, because I grew up during that time. You know, when the first Mortal Kombat came out on home consoles, I was 11 years old, so that was prime, like, growing time for me. You know, about to hit puberty, and, you know, it was like every teen gamer's dream to have a game that was violent and, like, manly, and, you know, as a, you know, now looking back at it, it's just kind of funny to just see it in that light, but, you know, it was kind of like right place, right time for me, and, so Mortal Kombat still holds kind of a special place in my heart. I know that's kind of sappy. We're gonna end this on a sappy note, guys, but, yeah, good stuff. Anyways, guys, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up here. I'll be back with many more Let's Plays soon, but I will be doing, maybe even this year, I'll be focusing more on the Mortal Kombats, much like in past years I focused on games like Doom, trying to do a lot of the versions of that. I'll probably try to do a lot of the versions of Mortal Kombat this year to try to wrap those up for this channel. And, yeah. So, hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll be back soon, and until then, take it easy, guys.